So we're going to continue now, but really start almost anew our discussion of tefillin. And we'll see if we want to continue with tefillin next week, or we want to go until Hilchos, maybe Borer. That we'll see as we go along. First, I want to answer a question that Rav Moshe asked me last week at this time, because I finally found the answer to his question. And that is the following. We said that the reason why the Tefillin Shel Yad has to come first is because in the verse itself, in the Pasuk, it says, Ukshartem lios hayadecha, which is the Tefillin Shel Yad, and then Utotfos beinecha. And not only that, we said even more than that, that the Tefillin Shel Yad represents Maaseh, action, and the Tefillin Shel Rosh represents hearing, meaning understanding. And we had at Har Sinai Nasa v'Nishma, and we first committed ourselves to do, and then to understand. And we sort of repeat and duplicate this every time we put on tefillin. We start with Nasa with the Shel Yad, and then we go on to Shel Rosh. So these are the explanations that are given as to why. Oh, very nice to see you. As to why the tefillin Shel Yad comes first before the tefillin Shel Rosh. So Rav Moshe asked me the following question. He says, all these explanations, why not give what seems to be the simplest explanation? We have a principle in halacha called Malim B'Kodesh. So, for example, you put on your tzitzis first, and then your tefillin. And why is that? Because tzitzis does not have the same level of sanctity of kedusha as the tefillin. Tefillin has the Shem Hashem. Tefillin has parshios in the Torah. It's written on cloth. It's written lishma. None of that exists in tzitzis. So we start in order to build up. In fact, you may recall that Beis Hillel says that we light one candle on the first night of Hanukkah, and then we move up and we increase because of Mailim B'Kodesh. We always go from the lower level, climbing higher and higher. And therefore, why do we need all these explanations? It would seem very simple that the reason why we put the Tefillin Shel Yad on before the Tefillin Shel Rosh is because which has a greater Kedusha, the Shel Yad or the Shel Rosh? Shel Rosh. So we should start with the lower Kedusha and build up to the greater Kedusha. So why do we need all these explanations? So I found the answer in the Mishnah Berurah. And the Mishnah Berurah, if you're interested, I'll just mention this. It's in Siman Chaf Hey, and it's Sifkat Chaf Gimel. And he says the following. We have another principle in halacha, which is called Ein Mavirin Ala Mitzvos. And that means that if I have a mitzvah that's accessible to me right now, I don't pass over that mitzvah in order to do another mitzvah. And therefore, what happens if you have, by accident, you've taken out the Shel Rosh? I don't know if it ever happened to you. By accident, whatever it is, maybe it wasn't placed in the right place, and you took out the Shel Rosh. Now you have the Shel Rosh in your hand. If we apply the principle of Ein Mavir Al Mitzvahs, then he should take the Shel Rosh and put it on first. And the reason for that is because even though we have a principle called Malim B'Kodesh, which means we start with a low level of Kedusha, but that only applies if there's no other reason to start with the higher level of Kedusha. So when you have a logically compelling reason to start with the higher Kedusha, then we put aside the principle of Malim B'Kodesh and we start with the higher level of Kedusha. Now, in this case, since he took the Shel Rosh into his hands, and we have a principle called Ein Mavir Al Mitzvahs, you're not allowed to pass over a mitzvah, he now has the Shel Rosh in his hand, then that would trump the principle of Malim B'Kodesh.
So how do you really define like Ein Mavir? And what one does it apply? Because when I touch my talis or whatever, what if I touch my tefillin first? Right? Is that considered, or even my tefillin bag, not even the actual tefillin itself? Correct.
Then I would definitely apply the principle of Ein Mavir Al Mitzvahs. Once you have the tefillin in your hands, or at least you touch the bag and it's accessible, then Ein Mavir Al Mitzvahs. That's why we put the talis on top of the tefillin. We should be very careful about that, so that we don't violate this principle of Ein Mavir Al Mitzvahs, because we want to fulfill Maila B'Kodesh. So we want to start with the tzitzis, and then build up to the tefillin, and therefore we want to have access to the tzitzis first.
Even though the tefillin is wrapped and in a separate bag,
I would assume so. Again, I'm not telling you halacha l'maisa right now, but I would tell you 99%. But again, let's just get back to Ramos's question, because I think now we have an answer to Ramos's question. That's where I didn't believe that the Mishnah Berurah actually asks you a question. He says the following: you now have taken the tefillin shel rosh into your hands. So what principle should apply now? Ein mavirin al mitzvahs. You don't want to put it. What?
Ein mavirin would be a different mitzvah.
Well, again, the Rambam counts them as two mitzvahs. We make two separate brachas. Let's say for the. So now you have a mitzvah shel rosh. You've taken the shel rosh into your hands, but the problem is ma'alim v'kodesh. So in this case, the Mishnah Berurah says that ein mavirin al mitzvahs would override the ma'alim v'kodesh, and therefore he'd have to put on the shel rosh first. Why? Because ein mavirin al mitzvahs. So ma'alim v'kodesh only applies when there's no other reason to start with the higher kedusha. In this case, there's a reason that's pressing us to start with the higher kedusha and put on the shel rosh first because of ein mavirin al mitzvahs. Says the Mishnah Berurah, we don't do that. Even if you took the shel rosh into your hands first, you're going to put on the shel yad first. Why? Not because of ma'alim v'kodesh. If it was only because of ma'alim v'kodesh, then at this point you would put aside the principle of ma'alim v'kodesh in favor of the principle of ein mavirin al mitzvahs. But why do we put on the shel yad first? Because the Torah says ukshartem lios al yadechem, and the Torah commands us in the mitzvah shel yad, and only after you fulfill the mitzvah shel yad, then you fulfill the mitzvah shel rosh. So I just wanted to point that out because I thought it was fascinating that this question came up.
It would just seem to me that you is a
Sure.
structure from the pasuk that the Gemara uses. That would seem to trump any of these principles.
Exactly, and that's why we need the drasha.
Vayu is plural. Vayu l'totafot. So which indicates when you put on the shel rosh, already has to be on it to make it plural. So, but that would seem to trump all these other principles, which.
Well, again, I'm not sure what you mean, Rabbi Moshe. The reason why Vahayu is in plural has to do with the bottom of the shel rosh. The Gemara derives.
I thought the drasha was that charting the ot al yadecha, the hayu, and they shall be, meaning the tefillin shel yad and the tefillin shel rosh. They shall
Together, you mean as one entity.
Exactly. So no, it's not. Right, the order of the pasuk would tell you yad is first.
Right, so that's what the Mishnah Berurah is saying. If not for the order of the pasuk, then the rule of ma'alim v'kodesh would not be an absolute rule. It would lend itself to exceptions in the case that we described where you took the shel rosh into your hands. But once the pasuk puts shel yad first, it becomes an absolute rule. And even if ein mavirin al mitzvahs, the Torah says first put on the shel yad and then the shel rosh. Why did the Torah want that? So we gave a couple explanations. Rashi says that if you have a shel yad, you have a yud. That's the kesher shel yad, which is attached to the bias of the shel yad. And we don't want to put on the shel rosh, which has a shin and a dalid, because then you have the word shave.
Right.
So we want to make sure the yud is there first. And others say the Torah wanted the shel yad first because it's keneged nasa, and nasa comes before nishma. But whatever it is, we can speculate from now until doomsday why the Torah says put on the shel yad first. But at the end of the day, the bottom line is the Torah requires that we put on the shel yad first, and that becomes, says the Mishnah Berurah, an absolute rule, an absolute prohibition. You cannot put the shel rosh on first. And therefore, even though you took the shel rosh into your hands, and normally we would have applied the principle of ein mavirin al mitzvahs, put on the shel rosh first, keep in mind, we will put the shel rosh down on the table. We'll put the shel yad on our hands because the Torah says in an absolute unconditional way that the shel rosh has to come after the shel yad. Okay.
One thing I did find, I also did one. Ein mavirin al mitzvah applies. Ma'alim v'kodesh applies that one is allowed to take the tefillin straps of the shel yad and use them for the shel rosh, but not vice versa.
Right. That is
fine. True. When the I just took a picture of it. When the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch writes it, for some reason I saw some people are commenting saying he's actually applying it to this question of why the tefillin shel yad is before, but it doesn't. He just writes Malin b'kodesh v'lo maridin. He just writes. And then he continues.
Right. Again, we're not denying that Ma'alim v'kodesh applies in this case. You were 100% right in your question. We're not rejecting your question.
No, no.
But
I
we're saying
understand, it just
that
fascinates me.
the principle of Malam Kodesh might have exceptions to the rule. We're
Right.
looking for an absolute.
Right.
Now, I'm going to ask for a picture here, when if everyone will turn to page 144, and we're going to take a little picture here. Does anybody have, oh, okay, we'll use my camera. Let's see. I don't know how to do this, but I was told that if the people who produce these pamphlets will see that we're learning from it, they'll supply it for us for free. That's what I was told. So they need a picture, and that sounds a little childish, but that's what that's what they require. So let me just see if I can find my camera here.
You want me to take a picture?
Oh, you could take a picture. In the meantime, I'm not.
Absolutely. I was
I'm
hoping to
not-
see Roberto take us up.
Yeah, I'm not finding the my camera right now for some reason because I'm under pressure. So you'll forward it to me, okay? All right. So I don't know how to do this, but make sure that you get the
It's Roberto, it's like advertising.
yeah. See if you can get this. Okay.
Hold it up.
Hold on, we don't see everybody there.
You just need to see the book.
You're hiding there. You got everyone? There you go. All right, I think that's good.
Okay.
Does the
So-
government,
Smiling?
does the government have a program including Hilchos Yeshivaretz to get a house or something?
That would
How
be
does that work?
that's brilliant. I think we'd like to get signed up for that.
Before you go on,
Yes.
The tefillins, aren't you supposed to put it in a certain order into your?
Well, it works like this. You take off your tefillin shalosh first, because the law is you should never be wearing, if possible, the tefillin shalosh without the tefillin shalyad. So we take off the tefillin shalosh, and then we take off the tefillin shalyad. So when you put it in the bag, you're going to be putting the shalosh first in the bag.
On the right or left?
Well, we always go for the right when we have a higher level of kedusha. Therefore, we want the shalosh to be on the right.
Okay, so then when you're. so
Then when you put your
reach for
tefillin
it-
on, you're going to know to go to the left first. Because of Milah B'Kodesh, you're going to take the tefillin shalyad out of the
so you
left.
couldn't technically take either one and put it on top of your.
Oh, so
bag?
Rav Moshe asked me the following question: are you allowed to put the tefillin shalyad on top of the tefillin shalosh? So if you have a bag that's vertical, right, which is now very popular, especially in the army, so you'll have the shalyad on top of the shalosh. So some poskim are not worried about that, but other poskim say there should be a HeSech. There should be something that means that the two are in sort of different compartments. So if you take a look at the tick, this nartik, if they're stacked one or the other directly, in other words, you stack the shalosh, or I should say the shalyad on top of the shalosh, that might be an issue. Because the kedusha of the shalosh is greater. You don't put on something with a lower kedusha directly on top. So therefore, what they do is they create a kind of a HeSech, something that separates between the shalyad on top and the shalosh on the bottom. And in that sense, they're in two different chadarim, which is literally translated as rooms, but it means two different compartments. And therefore, the shalosh is not directly under the shalyad. Okay,
If it's in a bag?
if it's in a bag, then it's great because then it's horizontal. So you have the shalosh on the right, the shalyad on the left. You take out the shalyad first in order to wrap it around. And then when you finish with your tefillin at the end of davening, you take out the shalosh first and put it on the right side. So you always know that when you take it out to put on the tefillin, you're going to look towards the left because the left has the shalyad and the shalyad has to come first.
It's always also someone who ever borrows your tefillin, everyone has a stamp.
Right. We try to make sure that, everyone has the same.
You
The
said
peak tefillin, it does, I told my kid just put it on the side, huh? If you put it on the horizontal.
You said before the tallis should be on top of the tefillin so that you don't reach for the tefillin first. So that's not a problem?
That's not a problem
Tallis
because
or
the
is,
tefillin are in its own
bag. I see,
compartment.
got it.
Right.
It's not direct.
right.
Got it.
Correct.
It's only,
No
problem.
Yeah.
It's only lifting.
So cute.
What's lifting? I didn't follow.
Putting, when you have to do a mitzvah, that's in your hand first.
Yeah.
What is that considered, lifting?
So that's what Yehuda was asking me. I think it means access. Access could
But
be
access
lifting.
isn't opening your bag. You're
No,
not
when you
supposed-
open your
usually
bag,
you have to-
hopefully
you have to-
you have equal access to both. Ein mavir al mitzvahs applies when you have access to one and you don't have access to the other. So even though you normally start with B, you're going to start with A because you only have access to A.
If I have my talus covering my tefillin, I open my bag, I have access. Like if it's.
Right, but you have access to the tzitzis and the talus as well. I'm talking about a case where you only have access to one of the two. So take, for example, you give me a pair of tefillin. There's no talus there.
Right.
Then
No, I
forget about
understand
the
that
talus.
scenario.
You ain't mavir al mitzvahs.
No, but we also said that your talus, you're putting it typically, right, you're placing your talus above the tefillin. So when you put your hand in the bag, you hit your talus first. But what I'm asking is it access or the act of lifting something? Because if it's access, then just opening the bag means I have access to everything in the bag.
Again, as long as you have equal access to everything in the bag, and as you have a decision now whether to take the talus or the tefillin, then you'll do whatever the halacha requires of you. In this case, Ma'alim B'Kodesh, you take the tzitzis. But if, let's say, somebody gave you access only to tefillin, and you don't have access to the talus now, then Ein Mavir al Mitzvahs, you'll have to put on your tefillin first.
But the scenario you have here, where you had your tefillin shel rosh was in your hand, you had access to the shel yad.
Well, because you said the
You're
pasuk
trusted by the
start
prophet.
them low side of that.
You two reflecting.
But why was it in question?
Why was it a question? Because once I picked up the shel rosh, at that point, I'm obligated to put it on.
I'm saying, what creates the obligation? Lifting?
Well, it depends, you know.
Proximity.
Again, if they're both accessible, then it's got to be lifting.
I understood it as lifting.
Right, if they're both accessible equally, then it's lifting.
Okay. That's,
If on the other hand, one is accessible and the other is not, then it's irrelevant to whether you lift it or not. Yeah. No, so that's why I just want to tell you that I'm just trying to tell you that Ein Mavir al Mitzvahs doesn't mean that he lifted. It could mean that he lifted, but it could also mean that that's all he had on the table.
Okay, I'm.
That's Ein Mavir al Mitzvahs.
You're on the table, you'd have to lift one of them to create that scenario.
Correct, exactly. If all are equally accessible, then it's only after you lifted it, then we apply Ein Mavirin. But in this case, we're not going to apply Ein Mavirin in the case of Tefillin Shel Rosh Shel Yad, but we would apply it in the case of tzitzis. Okay, now, here's my topic for tonight. And I'm going to need, gentlemen, your help in translating the Hebrew into English. Okay, then? So there's something called HeSech HaDaas. Does anybody want to give me, just throw out a translation of HeSech HaDaas, because we're very relevant to Tefillin. And many, many issues in Tefillin revolve around HeSech HaDaas.
Losing your train of thought.
Absent-minded.
Okay. Absent-minded, losing your train of thought, discontinuing your awareness, or becoming aware of something absolutely antithetical to what you should be aware of. So in the case of Tefillin, I can define HeSech HaDaas in many, many different ways. One way is to say that I'm not focused on my Tefillin. I'm just not thinking about my Tefillin. Another way of saying HeSech HaDaas is that I'm thinking about something other than my Tefillin. So for example, I have a CPA exam tomorrow. I'm thinking about my CPA exam. I'm not thinking about my Tefillin. So it's not just that my mind is blank, but that I'm linking my thoughts with something else. Now I have a third definition of HeSech HaDaas. I'm thinking about something that's antithetical to Tefillin. And that's called tzchok v'kalus rosh. I'm thinking about something that is very, very disconnected from sanctity. I'm jumping around thinking about, hoopla and having a soiree and so forth, so on. That's tzchok and kalus rosh. So in the middle case, although I'm not directly aware of my tefillin at this moment, but I'm thinking about something which in and of itself is powerful, it's neutral. I'm thinking about my CPA exam. I'm thinking about Manchester and the soccer game against, the British, whatever. But I'm not thinking about something that's negative. It's not kalus rosh, it's not tzchok. Now, let me explain why this is all relevant. If, for example, the Rambam addresses this question, a person is in a state of tirda. The Rambam calls it ein daitum yusheves alav. He He can't get a hold of his thoughts. His thoughts are running away from him. He's got a major exam. He's got an interview tomorrow for a job that'll determine his whole life. And the Rambam says about such a person, he's potter from tefillin. Now, let me go a step further and say that what the Rambam really has in mind, again, I'll have to be judged by the language of the Rambam, but is that he shouldn't be wearing tefillin. Because if it's ein daito b'yushevasol, if he can't get himself to concentrate, he's got something weighing heavily on his mind. He's about to embark on a major business enterprise. Then in such a case, forget about tefillin. Why? Because how does the Rambam define HeSech HaDaas? Anything that takes me out of the mindset of being linked up with my tefillin is already HeSech HaDaas. And the Shulchan Aruch says, as we'll see inside, that chayav adam lemashmesh b'tfilav b'chol shah. A person should be constantly, what's the word in English? Lunging? How do you say it? No. Yeah, when you lunge for something. Lunging or launching, I don't know how you say this verb. He should be constantly lunging or launching for his shel yad or his shel rosh, and constantly touching it and making sure that he's aware of it. The Shulchan Aruch seems to assume that in order to wear tefillin, you have to be constantly, perpetually aware of the tefillin. Now, let me quote to you a Gemara. The Gemara says in Masechta Shabbos Daf Yud Beis, Omar Rabba Chayav Adam Lemashmesh B'Tfilav Kol Shah V'Shah. And has the Gemara know this, that a person should always be connected to his tefillin while he's wearing it? Kal v'chomer mitzitz. What's the tzitz? The tzitz was a gold plate that the Kohen Gadol wore in his forehead. It had 4 letters on it: Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey. And the halacha is, the Torah says, V'haya al mitzcho tamid. The Gemara says that the Kohen Gadol has to constantly be connected and aware of his tzitz. He's not allowed to disconnect his thoughts from the tzitz for even a moment. And the Gemara says, Kal v'chomer, how much more so? Tefillin is even more than a tzitz. The tzitz has how many names of God on it? 1. The tefillin have many, many multiple names of God. So if with regard to the tzitz, the Kohen Gadol lo yasiach bihem, v'hayal mitzchot tamid means he's got to always be aware of what? Of the tzitz. Tefillin, sheyesh b'hem azkaras harbe, there are many names of God, alachas kama v'kama. And therefore the Shulchan Aruch paskins in Orach Chaim Siman Chav Ches, chayav adam lemashmesh b'tefillin kol shah. He's always connected to his tefillin, never disconnecting himself from tefillin. Shelo yasiach daito mehem. Unbelievable. And now I have a page for you, for those who like to see a text inside. I photocopied it a few times. And this is from a book that I mentioned to you last week, written by Rav Yitzchak Mirsky, for anyone who knows him. I have the original. And if you take a look on page 189, you'll see that this is a section from, you have 189?
No.
You don't have the 189.
I have 89.
All right, so I guess
How many copies?
that was probably the first copy and it wasn't done on both sides. Do you have on 2 sides? No.
This thing.
Okay. So I apologize. Now, what is Rav Mirsky's title here? You'll see it, even if you have page 190, you'll see it on the top page on the top page 90, he says again. On the top page 189, you'll see the title of this essay. It's called HeSech HaDaas B'Tefillin.
By the way, you didn't mention, what about HeSech HaDaas, like a positive one that you're thinking about some sugya in the Gemara has nothing to do with this.
Okay, great, excellent. That's exactly what this piece is about. And it's all based on the Rosh, Rabbeinu Asher, okay? Rabbeinu Asher, who lived, let's say, I'm going to just throw out a number, let's say 9 centuries ago, and he wrote a commentary on the Gemara called the Rosh, and he asks the following question. He says, I don't get it. You're telling me that I have to be aware of my tefillin at every single moment? What about when I recite Kriyat Shema? What's he supposed to be doing at the time of Kriyat Shema? Everyone, Kabbalas, oh Malchus Shomayim, he has to accept upon himself the yoke of heaven. What about when he's davening? What is he thinking about? He's thinking about Shevach, to praise Hashem. He's thinking about Bakasha, to ask Hashem to help him pass the CPA exam. He's thinking about Hodaya, to thank Hashem, B'chol Eis, B'chol Shah, for the nisim, for the miracles that he's alive and he can breathe. Kol Aneshama Talka, Al Kol Neshima Neshima Talka. So the Rosh is asking, are you telling me that he should take off his tefillin when he's reciting Kriyat Shema? The Gemara says that if a person recites Kriyat Shema in the morning without tefillin, it's Kemei and HeSech. It's a terrible thing. You're telling me he should take off his tefillin when he's davening? So how could he possibly fulfill this mitzvah of Lo Yasiach Daitem, and to be totally connected like he is, the Kohen Gadol is connected to what? To the tzitz, when he's thinking about his Kriyat Shema and his tefillah. And if I would have asked this question, you would have thrown me out. Rabbi Berzon, what are you saying to me? You're saying to me I have to take off my tefillin when I'm davening, take off my tefillin when I'm reciting Kriyat Shema, but the Rosh takes this very seriously. And in a very atypical way, he quotes Rabbeinu Yonah. Rabbeinu Yonah was about a half a century or a century before the Rosh, and very rarely quoted in the Rosh. And Rabbeinu Yonah says the following, that what it considered HeSech HaDaas is schok v'kalas rosh. If he's thinking about something that's antithetical to tefillin, it's levity, it's kalas rosh means he's joking around, or he's thinking about dvarim b'telim, he's thinking thoughts that he shouldn't be thinking. Kalas rosh. I mean, we have so many musas for him that tell us not to get involved in kalas rosh. Life is too serious for kalas rosh. Except here in our Dagan, where we love to make jokes, right? I love to make jokes anyway. So you hear what's going on. When you recite Kriyat Shema, says Rabbeinu Yonah, when you're davening, that's not HeSech HaDaas. Does Rabbeinu Yonah define HeSech HaDaas the way the Rambam defined it? The Rambam says, Chayav Adam Lamashmish B'Tfilav Kol Shah V'Shah. He's got to be continuously aware of his tefillin. He can't be thinking about anything else but his tefillin. He's like the Kohen Gadol with the tzitz, who's constantly connected to the tzitz.
He did not vote, so you can say a question.
How do you concentrate on these little things?
Excellent question. Excellent question. But again, Rabbosai, do you see? Just 1 minute. I just want to make sure that pedagogically I was clear. There are two roads diverging. There's an opening here of two approaches to what HeSech HaDaas is. One approach is that HeSech HaDaas is only a kind of a negative kavan. If, let's say, I'm not thinking about schok and kalas rosh, I'm just thinking about how I have to say good morning to my to my wife when I get back from shul. That's not a problem. That's not schok and kalas rosh, correct? And that would be okay. Or do we define schok and kalas rosh as a positive kuva? Say you have to actively be involved in your tefillah.
Can I say something? Rav Soloveitchik spoke about, I think it was his discussion of Talmud Torah, the fact that it's a constant awareness. There's a latent awareness
and an acute
awareness. Right, like a mother that
I was there when he said it. We finished the first parak of Chulin.
So would that apply in this case here? Maybe there's a latent awareness of tefillin, like you put on tefillin, and then there's that immediate, intense awareness of your tefillin. That, and as when you're wearing your tefillin and saying Shemona Esrei, one can argue there is a HeSech HaDaas, but there isn't, because it's a latent awareness that you're davening with your tefillin on. That people
until you're focused on something that's antithetical to tefillin.
Right. So does the HeSech HaDaas, leaving aside that, can be defined? You don't even have to go as far as Kala Drosh. But HeSech HaDaas, is you define awareness of tefillin into like the way the Rav did about Talmud Torah.
So Rav Moshe, you're absolutely right according to Rabbeinu Yonah. But let's say according to the Rambam, who says Chayav Adam Lamashmish B'Tefillah. So I don't know if you have page 190. Do you have page 190 just for a split second? I'm sorry, I apologize. Klasav Baal Sridia Eish. You have Baal Sridia Eish on page 190 if you have it on the top line. Is there an extra page 190 floating around?
I
Or?
can give you 189 if you want.
No, they-
Well, hold on to 189. I'm going to come back to 189 in just a second. But here, I don't know if you know who the Sri HeSech is, Rabbi Yechiel Weinberg. He was a very, very unique personality. He went through the horrors of the horrors of the horrors of the Holocaust. Anyway, he writes L'das HaRambam, Adam Sarich Lachshov Shetfilin Barosho. A man has to think about the fact that he's got tefillin on his head. Why? Because Kadesha Yizkar Toras Hashem, K'moshe Nemar, as the pasuk says, V'hayu l'chol yosa yadecha, u'lezikaron beinenecha, and then the Torah adds a few words, Leman tia Toras Hashem beficha, and not only that, Kibiyod chazak otziach Hashem mitzrayim, and therefore Mikan Lamad. From this pasuk, the Rambam apparently concluded that mitzvah's tefillin eino masa bilvad. It's not just putting on the tefillin like taking a lulav or eating matzah, but ikar mitzvah hu azikaron. It's the state of awareness of the Torah, awareness of Yitzias Mitzrayim. The imei siach daito eino makayim mitzvah. And he goes on in the next paragraph, in the name of the Sri HeSech, to say, L'das HaRambam, HeSech HaDaas, hu t'nai v'chelek me'etzem mitzvahs tefillin. So again, just to summarize, there's a lot of technical language here, but basically, according to the Sri HeSech's understanding of the Rambam, tefillin itself is an active awareness. And therefore, if you're not actively aware, then you have not fulfilled the mitzvah of tefillin, because the Rambam defines that awareness as essential to the mitzvah of tefillin. But I have in front of me, Rabbosai, another book amongst the very few Sfarim that I saved and I didn't give away to the wall, to the, what's it called, the Yeshiva Har Choma. I have a book called the Emek Bracha. He has many pages on tefillin. He says, Be'inyan HeSech HaDaas b'tefillin. He starts by quoting the Rosh, who quotes in turn Rabbeinu Yonah, and Rabbeinu Yonah says that HeSech HaDaas v'tefillin, that which is discontinuing, that's only schok and kalos rosh. And he comes to the following conclusion. We're going to talk later on, if we have time, either tonight or another time, we'll talk about what's called shenas aroi. Did you ever have an experience where you were wearing tefillin, and all of a sudden, you find yourself with your head down on the table? It happens to me a lot. In other words, you didn't get enough sleep the night before, and you take, let's call it a power nap, or you just go into a state of temporary slumber. That's called a shenas aroi. And he says that the Gemara in Sukkah allows you to have a shenas aroi while you're wearing tefillin. So if, let's say, you see somebody that, he fell a little bit of a sleep and he's wearing tefillin, do you have to wake him up? You have to nudge him and say, wait a minute, you're wearing tefillin. You better wake up.
You don't know. Until he wakes up, you don't know that's all right.
Well, we assume it's aroi. Why? Because, he's sitting in a shul, his head fell on the sefer, he's not in a deep sleep, he's just misnamne. Misnamne means he's in a dozing. He's dozing a little bit. He dozes off. I can tell you, I can testify that I've seen thousands of people doze off during all my classes over the last 50 years. So I can testify that I know what it means, because I see people doze off, and I myself also doze off. And that's okay. So the Emek Bracha asks the following question. What do you mean? While he's dozing off, he's not thinking about his tefillin. Isn't that HeSech HaDaas? Shouldn't we wake him up and say, buddy, get up, stop dozing, and be aware of your tefillin?
Rambam, it just means he's at that moment, he's not fulfilling.
Excellent. But let's go first according to Rabbeinu Yonah. According to Rabbeinu Yonah, do we have to wake him up? No. Why? Because it's not correct. It's not schok v'kalos rosh. Well, we're hoping that if he's dozing, he's not really dreaming. But if he goes into a deep slumber, if he lays down on a bed and he's wearing his tefillin, you bet your bottom dollar, even according to Rabbeinu Yonah, you better wake him up, because I don't know what the heck he's dreaming about. And it's schok v'kalos rosh. But as far as shenas aroi is concerned, says the Emek Bracha, we don't have to wake him up, because we don't assume that he's in a state of schok v'kalos rosh. But then he asks the following question. The Rambam says that if ain't daito miyusheves alav, if he's thinking about something, that's tense in his life, potem in tefillin. Says the Rambam, why should he be exempt from tefillin? Mipnei she'hu meiniach tefillin hu meisiach daito. The asur lasiach daito. The Rambam is not talking about schok and kalas rosh. The Rambam is talking about ein daito miyusheves alav.
Why is it potter and also?
I don't know. At that, I can't figure out. Excellent question you just asked.
Maybe it's just 'cause
So I have trouble with the language of the Rambam.
maybe it's just because you're
Potter
not doing anything wrong, you're just not fulfilling the mitzvah.
But later he says it's usher to wear it. He says it's potter in the mitzvah because it's usher to wear it if you don't have a dot. So if it's usher to wear it, it's usher to wear it. It's not that it's exempt. And
So
the
let
Rambam
me-
is usually
But
do
also,
it.
is it like
Yeah.
a hamshake? Like,
How are we doing on the clock? We still have 3 minutes.
I'm saying,
I don't want to keep you from Myra.
Put on your
I
tefillin,
dived in.
you put it from your Yod Say the Mitzvah, that moment you put it on, like in Teal, you pick up your lulav. What is the rest of the mitzvah? In other words, you've already Yod Say the Mitzvah, now 10 minutes later you have HeSech.
But again, that's not the case of the Rambam. The Rambam is saying the tefillin are on the table, but you're thinking about this terrible exam that you have to take tomorrow.
Right, yeah, I
Like my
understood
son
that.
took anatomy
But
in
even-
the Einstein Medical School, and he said he had to, for months, he had to memorize every single part of the body. And by the way, this is not for publication. The day after the exam, he forgot it all. Well, I asked Dr. Your brother-in-law, what's his name, Dr. Sharp. I asked him if he still remembers anatomy. So he tells me he reviews it from time to time. But my son doesn't need anatomy. Anyway, to make a long story short, he's in a nervous, tense state, and the Rambam says he should not be wearing tefillin. He's not obligated in tefillin. Am I obligated in tefillin? Well, if it's daytime, I haven't put on tefillin, I'm obligated in tefillin. No, says the Rambam. You're thinking about this exam, you're not going to be chayiv in tefillin. Comes along the Emek Bracha, his name is Pamaranchik, and he asks the following kasha. From whence do we derive the Iser HeSech HaDaas in tefillin? From the tzitz, correct? So now we have an extra mitzvah which we derive from tzitz. The Gemara doesn't derive the Iser HeSech HaDaas from the pasuk Ukshartem lios al yodecha vayulu totvos beinecha. If we only had that pasuk, there'd be no Iser HeSech HaDaas. All I have to do is don my tefillin, and I'm fulfilling the mitzvah. The Torah added through Kal Vachomer another mitzvah. The other mitzvah is to be aware of the tefillin with Kedushas tefillin, and it's going to be like the Kohen Gadol with the tzitz. How did the Rambam say that you're part of a tefillin? What do you mean you're part of a tefillin? Just because you can't be Mekayim that extra mitzvah, you can't go that extra 10 yards, and fulfill the tzitz. Therefore, you're not chayiv in the mitzvah of tefillin. You got tefillin in front of you. You have not put on your tefillin. You're chayiv in tefillin. No. The Rambam is going to say you're part of tefillin. Why? Because you can't be aware of it. Says the Emek Bracha. How do you know you can't be? How do you know that you have to be aware of it? Do you know it from the pasuk Ukshartem? Does the Torah say in Ukshartem that you have to be aware of the tefillin? The Torah says don the tefillin, put it on your arm, put it on your head. The Torah doesn't say don't be Mesiach Das. That we derive from a Kal Vachomer. From where? From tzitz. That adds an extra, a cherry on the top of the cake. So what? So you can't fulfill the cherry on top of the cake? Therefore, you're part of the mitzvah? How can the Rambam say you're part of a mitzvah?
Because he holds it definitional. It's not that the tzitz is defining what it is, not an additional.
Who says that?
I just.
I thought you would tell me the 3DH says it. Exactly. Okay, Moshe, you said it, and you would have said it even without the 3DH. But the 3DH says it. The 3DH understands that according to the Rambam, what we derive from tzitz is a reflection of Kedushas Tefillin. That's what I wanted you to see in this page here in the Tzumi Rabbanan. Again, you may have to run for Myriv, I'll forgive you. But if you have page 144, he has the Rambam in front of you. Kedushas Tefillin. Kedushasan Gedola. You have to respect and honor the sanctity of the tefillin. Not only that, the Rambam says when you are wearing tefillin, then you're in a state of anav, of humility, of Yirei Shamayim, of fear of heaven. Eino nimshach b'sroku slicha b'teila. He's not interested in all the hevlei olam hazeh, all these worldly meaningless frivolities. Ein mahar machshavos ros, ela mefana libo. The tefillin and the kedusha sanctify you; they uplift you. B'divrei emes v'tzedek, you're dedicated to truth and to righteousness. Lefichach tzorech adam l'shtalel lios olav kol hayom.
Why the ficha? Doesn't make sense.
Okay, so the question is, do we have time for that? Rav Soloveitchik, I'll give it to you on. I'll say Amazleg. The Rav said in his yard side shir that what's the word lefichach here? There are many mitzvahs that are ongoing, perpetual mitzvahs. For example, tzitzis is an ongoing mitzvah, and there are many Talmud Torah. Why does the Rambam feel that in order to justify that tefillin is an ongoing mitzvah, he has to tell you about the kedusha of tefillin? So Rav Soloveitchik says, and again, this is an hour-long discussion. He says that the mitzvah of tefillin does not exhaust itself with putting on the tefillin, with donning the tefillin, with the maisa. The tefillin is a mitzvah of experiencing a new level of sanctity when the man is sanctified. And the Rav has comparisons to Shabbos and to Talmud Torah, in which the Rav says that there's certain specific mitzvahs. We can isolate a few mitzvahs out of the 613, that the essence of the mitzvah is to sanctify the person with a level of kedusha as a result of the mitzvah. The mitzvah has an impact on the person, uplifting him to the level of kedusha sagavra, as he calls it. And he says that that's the essence of tefillin, to sanctify you. Lefichach, since you can gain that sanctity, and every minute that you wear the tefillin, you're uplifted by the tefillin because you're not thinking about machshavos ros, you're not thinking about things that are frivolities, but rather you're dedicating yourself to truth, to Torah, to tzedek. If that's the awareness of tefillin that sanctifies you, then every moment you should be wearing tefillin, says the Rambam. How do I know that tefillin is not just a mitzvah to put it on and take it off, and I yotze the mitzvah, and that you could get from the pasuk Shartem? No, the mitzvah is not just to put it on and take it off. The mitzvah is to be sanctified with a kedusha that is generated by wearing tefillin. And if that be the case, then every minute that you have, every opportunity, you should take advantage of to be niskadish b'kedushas tefillin. As my father used to say about his grandfather, he can't remember him without tefillin. Although we have one picture of my great-grandfather, and he's not wearing tefillin. So we have a whole machlokas in the family. Why in the pictures is he not wearing tefillin? Somebody tried to color in to the picture tefillin. But the truth is, I believe that the reason why he was not wearing tefillin is because that picture was taken for a passport. And he was hoping to get out of Europe, which he never did. But when you take a picture for a passport, that's the only picture we have of my great-grandfather. Anyway, so a person should be wearing tefillin the whole time. And the Shulchan Aruch says maybe if you're a chassid, you should be wearing tefillin the whole day. But if you're not a chassid, then we're afraid that maybe you won't have the proper attitude, you won't be connected to your tefillin, and you won't have this kedusha, and you might even come to HeSech HaDaas and therefore take off your tefillin, and that's fine. But what we want to see from here is the shita of the Sridei Eish in interpreting the Rambam. If the essence of tefillin, according to the Rambam, is not just putting on the tefillin, take him off, but to achieve that ongoing sanctity of tefillin that sanctifies the person. And that's why the Gemara says, and I always thought this was the source of Chabad, the Gemara says that karkafta de lo manach but tefillin, if he never wore tefillin in his life, chas v'sholem, then he's posheya b'Yisrael. And that's what Lubavitch wants to do, to make sure that every Jew wears tefillin at least once in his life. This is the kedusha of tefillin. And therefore the Sridei Eish is right to say that this connection to the tefillin, which means to sanctify yourself by connecting to the tefillin, is critical to the mitzvah of tefillin. And the Rambam says that Misha ein daito b'yusheves alav, and he realizes full well that his mind is preoccupied with his exam tomorrow, which will determine whether he's a doctor or not a doctor. Then he should not be wearing tefillin because he's going to come to HeSech HaDaas. And then we still have Yehuda's question: why does the Rambam say he's parted? So again, he's parted against everything we're saying now is against the Emek Bracha. The Emek Bracha says this Rambam makes no sense, and he leaves it b'tzarach iyud. He cannot justify the Rambam. The Rambam says Mishain Daito Yesheves Olav. He's not chayiv in tefillin. Says the Emek Bracha Rav Paranchik. No, that's a question of tzitz. That's an additional surplus mitzvah on top of tefillin. The mitzvah of tefillin is to put on the tefillin, and that he can do even if he's thinking about his medical exam. he will forfeit the mitzvah of tzitz, of not having HeSech HaDaas as an extra kiyum. And that's how the Emek Brach understood the Rambam. But according to the Sridei Eish, he understood that this equation from tzitz, which generates the Kedushas Tefillin, is essential and critical to the mitzvah of Tefillin. But again, we have Almi L'Smoch, we have the Rosh in the name of Rabbeinu Yonah, that the Iser HeSech HaDaas is only violated when you have a negative kavanah in your tefillin. Okay, then. So first, I want to say thank you to everyone for coming, and anyone who wants to stay longer, please do. I have no other appointments tonight except for supper, but I had a big lunch at 1:00 this afternoon. Go ahead. Thank you so much.
We did not talk about when someone takes off their tefillin.
Ooh, are you going to Reshit Gancha? Can I just trouble you on the way out to bring this down? There's a table in the back there where we usually learn. If you could put it on the table, just leave it on the table.
We didn't discuss it.
Thank you so much.
Takes off their tefillin and puts it back on. Is that as far as HeSech HaDaas making a new bracha?
So the Mishnah Berurah writes in the Bir Halacha that you would require a new bracha if there was something called Dichui HaMitzvah.
Right.
What's Dichui HaMitzvah? Correct. That's Dichui HaMitzvah. And then the Mishnah Berurah says that it says in the Shulchan Aruch that if you're going to eat a Su'uda Kvua, a real meal, then you have to take your tefillin off. Says the Mishnah Berurah in Bir Halacha, and I can tell you exactly where to find it, that when he puts on his tefillin a second time, after he finishes his meal, he's going to have to make a bracha. Because that's Dichui HaMitzvah. Once Chazal established that you cannot wear your tefillin while you're eating a Suda Kfua, Rashi says because we're afraid you'll get drunk. In those days, they probably had every meal with some intoxicating beverage. So then it's Dichui Mitzvah. And the Bir Halacha says, even though the Iser here is only D'Rabban, it's only Gzeira, we're afraid you might get drunk and intoxicated during this very beautiful Henry VIII banquet. Nevertheless, that makes it into Dichui HaMitzvah. He's obligated to take off his tefillin. Once he's obligated to take off his tefillin, he's going to have to make another bracha when he puts it on.
But according
Is that a pella? No.
Yeah, but according to Emek HaBracha, it's it's just a bonus that seeds and HeSech HaDaas. So
No, the intoxication is already schok.
no, I'm saying HeSech. I'm talking about HeSech HaDaas now. So when he takes off his tefillin and he puts them on, according to the Emek HaBracha, you should always make another bracha.
I see.
Putting on your tefillin, that's it. Your tefillin are not on now. You know, the same way that any other, I don't know, I guess Birchas Torah is different. We make one bracha, but like if the mitzvah is, if you leave aside the tzitz and the mitzvah is wearing your tefillin, if they're not wearing them, there's no issue with HeSech HaDaas. They're physically not on me.
No, but let's say, for example, let's say I'm eating a meal and I have to take a little break and then I come back to continue. I don't make a new bracha. So if I take off
That's doing HeSech HaDaas.
No, but I'm just saying, I put on my tefillin.
But if the mitzvah is nothing, HeSech HaDaas is a bonus to the mitzvah. Okay, we leave that aside.
No, leave out HeSech.
So if we take
But once I took off my tefillin,
yeah.
if I had das to immediately put them on again, I shouldn't be making a bracha. Why? Because the halacha is, let's say, for example, I have many animals to shed. I don't have to make a bracha on each animal. One bracha will suffice for all the shchitos. Here also, one bracha will be chal on every single hanachas tefillin, unless there's some interruption, some HeSech, like for example, according to the Mishnah Berurah, Dichui HaMitzvah.
I know that, but that concept that makes sense to me if there's a din of HeSech HaDaas. Or is it taken off? There's no HeSech HaDaas because you have dot to put it back.
No, wait a minute, Moshe. Are we on the same page? I'm saying he doesn't have to make a bracha. You're saying he does have to make a bracha.
According to Emek HaBracha.
But why? If I have, let's say, many mitzvahs in front of me.
Right, but in this case, the dot is not relevant. What's relevant is
what you want to take.
no. I'm saying the question of dot HeSech HaDaas, yes, that is not relevant here. The question is, are the tefillin on you or are they not on you? As you make a bracha when you put on your tefillin, and that's it.
But I'm saying that even if the tefillin are not on you, if I made a bracha and I have in mind to put on the tefillin, I don't have to make a bracha. right? Every time I make a bracha, I don't have the tefillin
But it's a
on.
birkat mitzvah, it's not a birkat nen.
No, so I'm saying over lasiyasan, and over lasiyasa will connect me with every single asiya as long as there was no HeSech, right? I can do an asiya 15 million times, and one bracha will cover me for
But
all the
shouldn't
mitzvahs.
taking off your tefillin be considered a hefsek? If it's not about what the
I don't
tzvi-
think so. Again, if you had in mind to put it on again, like for example, let's say you go into the bathroom and you take off your towels.
But walk
You don't
out
make
the
another
sukkah,
bracha, even though
walk
you
out
took
the
off
sukkah
your
and I have
towel.
mind to come again, you make a new bracha.
I don't think so. If you have a mind immediately to go in again, then maybe I have sick of man. But again, let's say I go into the bathroom and I take off my towels, right? In some shuls, they even have a hook,
But they-
you know.
You tell your child that everyone goes in with their tzitzis on.
All right, but I'm just saying, I take off my talus girdle for whatever reason,
Yeah.
and I have in mind to put it on as soon as I come out of the what do they call it? But they have another fancy name for it these days. What do they call it?
Lavatory.
Lavatory, yeah. So I don't have to make another bracha on my talus in that case. And that's really interesting because I'm going to put on my talus again. There's a new Maisa Ituf, and yet the bracha that I put on the first Ituf will cover me for the second Ituf. Unless you have something that constitutes a HeSech, which according to the Mishnah Berurah is Dichuya Mitzvah. But in the case of going into the washroom, that's what I wanted, the washroom. In Canada, they call it a washroom. Yeah, in going into the washroom with talus, I could really wear my talus in the one, but I don't want to wear it in the bathroom for whatever reason.
Yeah.
So there's no Dichuya Mitzvah, and therefore the brach on the first Ituv couldn't cover the second Ituv.
I understand that. But trying to think of a good
Again, we're not tasking any halachas here, obviously. Let me just shut this down because I know you're going to want to lock up here.